Welcome to part 2 of the 6138 Seiko UFO chronograph, and in this episode we locate and fix, in inverted commas, the chronograph fault, the main chronograph fault that is, with regards to the non-running. Here I'm just removing the oscillating weight and just as a refresher showing you the problem. Once the chronograph is engaged, you'll see the balance wheel slows and eventually stops. And once the chronograph is disengaged, you'll see that it picks up once again. And in this particular instance, it took a little longer than it has previously, but you'll see it stopped there. And then once you've disengaged the chronograph and even before resetting, it picks up again. So here I'm just removing the automatic winding bridge to give us access to the chronograph bridge. This is composed of 3 parts and is held in place by 2 screws. It has an upper plate, the automatic winding pole levers, and a thin sandwich lower plate, which just maintains the separation between the auto winding works and the chronograph bridge. As you can see here, the lower plate is actually stuck to the upper plate, and the reason for this, as you'll see in just a moment, is a bit of an excess of oil and some oil creep. Not entirely sure why, because this upper portion shouldn't have much in the way of oil on it anyway, just just a little on the bearing and on the pivot. And you can see there, just trying to demonstrate, you can see that it's got a bit of oil creep there. And there's the upper plate with the pole lever. So you can see how that operates, similar to the 6309 series, same kind of principle. And here I'm removing the first reduction wheel, which differs to the 6309 etc. by having a slightly longer pinion, or a slightly longer pivot rather, with a pinion at the end, this is to reach down through the thickness of the chronograph bridge and to the ratchet wheel below. This exposes the chronograph bridge that you can see there in front of you, and with the chronograph engaged, you can see that the chronograph runner isn't turning as it should and the balance comes to a stop. But there, where I lift it up, and this is just lifted very slightly, you'll see it picks up again, and you can actually see in the middle through that slot the chronograph runner continuing to turn, where I'm pointing with my pegwood just at the moment. And you'll see once I drop that down again, that the balance comes to a stop once again. And again, just lifting the movement very slightly. I've just swapped to brass tweezers there, which is really what I should have been using. Just lifting the movement very slightly, you can see that the balance begins to beat again. Now this told me immediately, once I'd gotten to this point, that the problem is very unlikely to be on the chronograph bridge side of things, because I'm not moving the bridge there, I'm literally just lifting it. As you can see, I lifted it at a different place there to demonstrate, but this bridge is securely fixed in place. The problem is actually on the dial side, and it's the seconds hand, the center seconds hand, that is catching on the crystal, although it didn't appear to be in the previous video. So to double check and make absolutely certain that that is the case, I'm going to go ahead and uncase the movement and give that a run and a test to actually verify that this runs adequately, and then pop it onto the time grapher to assess the timing results without and with the chronograph running, to see if there is any noticeable difference with the movement uncased. To remove the movement holding ring, you need to slightly depress the 2 chronograph buttons, as these are held in place by the movement ring, and then grip and lift the movement ring away like so. The chronograph buttons are then loose and will come out. These will all be cleaned and re-greased with silicone grease before they are refitted. And then the movement itself is just removed as normal. Once uncased and the stem is refitted, I put this back into a movement holder. This is a movement holder that I'm actually working on. I'm designing at the moment while I have the movement to allow me to do so, to take the relevant measurements. And I'm in the process of designing a movement holder that will enable this to be held firmly and allow the fitting of the hands and such, and operation of the chronograph. And it's designed in such a manner, this is only part of the holder at the moment because it's still in the prototyping stage, but it's designed in such a manner that it grips the movement quite firmly and it will not come out. It can actually be turned over and upended and the movement won't come out. I'm not a fan of movement holders that do not grip a movement firmly, because if you have to put a little bit of pressure anywhere, just putting a click spring into place or anything like that that you have to hold at any point while you place another item or tighten a screw, they have a tendency to jump and slip, and it's a bit of a bugbear of mine. So this is why I like to 3D print my holders and design them in such a manner that they grip the movement. As you can see there, that's held very firmly, but it will come out very, very easily. And you'll see these two slots, top and bottom, at the 6 and 12 positions. That allows you to pop a screwdriver in and just gently lever up on the plate, and you see that comes out very, very easily. And to replace back in there, all you need is to press down on the dial plate below the dial and just slot that in, and it just clicks into place. The two cutouts are for removing it. The cutout at 9 o'clock, the cutaway section there, is actually just a relief slot for the balance wheel, not for levering the movement out. And there you can see the holes for actuating the chronograph. Here I'm just going to operate the chronograph, start it and leave it running for a couple of minutes, and we'll just speed up this next section. And this is just to test to see that it does in fact run acceptably and without problem. And as you can see, that's going very nicely indeed. And once this is done, I'll pop this on the time grapher and we'll take a look at the timing results to see if there is any kind of problem with the chronograph works causing drag or slowing the movement down. So this is a bit of a good news and bad news situation. It's good news for the owner because it means that there's nothing seriously wrong with the chronograph side of things, especially with the chronograph runner, which is a particular problem with these because they are hard to come by now. So with the watch in its holder on the time grapher, I'm just going to take a quick look at the trace, and we've got a good beat error, a decent amplitude at 240 degrees, which for a Seiko, and a vintage Seiko at that, is pretty good. This is on a full wind incidentally. This is dial up. Dial down, this is with the chronograph not running incidentally. Dial down, we've got a little bit of a beat error, around about the same amplitude. Pendant down, again quite similar, a little bit of beat error. Pendant right, we've got a bit more of a sort of slight drop in amplitude and a slight increase in rate, which is the two of which go hand in hand really. We're currently in dial up position and we are at 230, between 235 and 240 amplitude. So chronograph engaged. A slight drop in amplitude, which is reasonably normal because there's always going to be a little bit more drag, but there shouldn't be a huge difference. But the amplitude's picked back up again and slightly more loss. The amplitude's actually picked back up considerably. Interesting. So that is actually running quite well with the chronograph running. Not dissimilarly, it's evening out to again between sort of 15 and 20 seconds. Dial down, very similar, pendant down. Very similar. I think maybe just a very slight drop in amplitude, but not much, not really so much. And pendant right, pretty much as before. Maybe slightly more of a drop in altitude, slightly more of a drop in amplitude, but only slightly, and it's now evening out again. So this tells me that everything is absolutely fine with the chronograph. The results that we're getting are perfectly good. I'm just going to stop that and reset the chrono. So why good news and bad news? Well, as I said, it's good news for the owner because this means that there's nothing serious with the watch. So he'll be delighted to hear that. However, it's bad news for me and for us generally, for you guys viewing, because it means I don't get to take this apart and have a look at the innards of it. That said, it's not all bad because the upper side of the movement, where the chronograph works are, will be largely the same as the 6139. Now I will be stripping my own 6139 at some point, and now that I'm working on this movement holder for the 6138, I will also be checking to see if it has a degree of compatibility with the 6139 and designing a movement holder for that one as well. And this came about because I picked up a couple of Valjoux 7750 movements recently. And looking at the movement holders online, they're actually very, very expensive. Even the cheaper ones are very expensive. And of course, having access to 3D design software and a 3D printer means that we can look at making cheaper alternatives that will do the job just as well. And having created a holder for the Valjoux 7750, which works nicely, I then set about making one for the 6138, knowing that I was going to have to do some work on this one. So on the upper side, it's largely going to be the same as a 6139, so that's not too bad. The only real difference is going to be in the winding section, because this one hand winds where the 6139 doesn't. But that's going to be a matter of a winding pinion and a crown wheel, essentially, or a series of wheels to turn the ratchet wheel. That said, it's not all bad news on the what's inside the movement front, because I will still have to strip the dial side, because the hour wheel is actually driven from the dial side via a cam on the mainspring barrel, and because this is being driven constantly, something is either disengaged or not seated correctly, or it either has the hammer not working or a spring which has come adrift or something along those lines. And this means that the hour wheel is being driven constantly all of the time that the watch is running, whether the chronograph is running or not. And while it's not something that's the worst thing in the world, because typically when you use a chronograph, you're not, as a general rule, using it to measure hours. It's usually just a few minutes. It's something that would personally annoy me, and I would like to fix it. And also I've got that curiosity. I want to see what's in the dial side. So it will require movement of the hands, movement of the dial, movement of the day-date module. Now I could remove that as an entire module because it is a sandwiched module that does come off on its own. However, I will strip that to check it and see how that works as well, for the sake of interest, because I'm going in there anyway. And then we'll look to see if we can figure out what the actual fault with the hour counter is. Where we're at with that, it's a little bit of a slightly disappointing update, really, in the sense that there's not as much wrong with this as I suspected. It's great news for the owner, because from his point of view, his concern was that there might have been a problem with the chronograph wheel, and that's quite understandable because these parts are getting like the proverbial rocking horse deposits. So that's great news. It's great news that is functional and working and not a problem. It's running well, it's pumping out a good amplitude, and with a little bit of tightening up on the regulation, it will be keeping time well as well. So the next step is going to be removal of the dial and associated components. The date wheel assembly is in one piece, and you can unscrew the entire plate and remove it in one piece. However, I will be taking that apart, partly out of curiosity to see how the whole thing works, partly also just to make sure everything's okay there. I believe it is. It's changing date and day acceptably well. But I would like to check while I'm in there anyway. It's certainly not going to hurt anything. And then of course we can access the rear portion with the springs and the reset hammer for the hour wheel. So thanks for watching this update, and we will catch you in the next one.